remember jumping from the chopper. I remember the mission briefing. I remember everything. But I don't remember how many times we've done this before. I see myself in the watchtower, staring, waiting. If I'm already down there, then who am I up here? Reinforcements inbound. Wait, that's my voice. No. You were never meant to leave. The helicopter's rotors roared above, kicking up a storm of sand and dust as we touched down. I squinted through my goggles, the Afghan desert stretching endlessly, waves of heat rising off the barren land. The outpost stood like a rotting carcass, a few makeshift buildings and sandbag barriers, barely holding together. "Welcome to hell," Sergeant Carter muttered, adjusting his rifle. His voice was barely audible over the chopper's whine. I stepped onto the cracked ground, the heat suffocating even through my gear. The scent of dust, old metal, and something stale, like dried blood, hung in the air. This place had been abandoned before, and it felt like it wanted to stay that way. Behind me, Ugly Betty, the unit's old mutt, let out a low growl, her ears pinned back. "Something wrong, girl?" I muttered, patting her side. She wouldn't move, wouldn't even step onto the outpost's soil. The wind shifted, a faint whisper. Not English, not Pashto, something older. I turned sharply, rifle up. Nothing, just the whistling wind through rusted fences. "Lima," Carter barked. "Quit sightseeing, move it." We pushed forward. The watchtower stood empty, sandbags torn open. Bullet holes pockmarked the walls, but no shell casings, no bodies. Like a fight had happened, but the dead had simply vanished. Jonesy nudged me. "Dude, tell me that doesn't look like blood." I followed his gaze. Dark stains splattered across the dirt near the entrance. Old, dry. But the weird part? The blood hadn't faded. It should have been baked out by the sun. Instead, it looked fresh. A shiver crawled up my spine. The radio on my shoulder crackled with static. Then, a voice. "Leave." A woman's whisper. Every hair on my body stood on end. Carter scowled, tapping his earpiece. "Command, say again." Silence. I looked at the others. They'd heard it too. The air felt heavier the moment we stepped past the outpost's rusted gate. No birds, no insects, just silence. We moved in a tight formation, scanning the perimeter. The sand crunched beneath our boots, but there was something odd about it. It was darker than normal, almost like it had been soaked in something thick, something old. "Man, this place gives me the creeps," Jonesy muttered, scanning a row of abandoned barracks with his rifle. "Yeah? Tell me when it doesn't," Zolik shot back, keeping his finger near the trigger. Carter motioned forward, leading us toward the main command tent. The flaps swayed, despite the still air, as if something had just slipped inside. I felt my grip tighten on my weapon as I stepped in first. Inside, everything was left behind. Half-eaten rations, a map still pinned to the table, the previous unit's radio, wires dangling, its battery completely corroded. No bodies, no notes, no sign of evacuation orders. Then I saw it. The first clue. On the far wall, etched deep into the wooden frame, were scratch marks, clawed, uneven. But it wasn't random. A word. Blood. The moment I read it, the radio hissed with sharp static. Then, a voice. Low. Raspy. "Get out." I felt something move behind me. A presence. I spun, rifle raised. Nothing. But my chest was tight, my pulse hammering. Then I saw Ugly Betty outside the tent, staring, hackles raised, growling, at nothing. And then, She started whimpering, the kind of fear no animal fakes. I turned back to Carter. Something happened here. His face was pale. His radio was still in his hand. That voice, he muttered. That wasn't on our channel. We weren't alone. The sun was setting, casting long, eerie shadows over the outpost. The golden light did little to chase away the cold feeling in my gut. We moved toward the old watchtower, following a trail of disturbed dirt and scattered footprints, but not ours. Ugly Betty refused to move forward. She stood at the edge of the path, her body low, ears pinned back, eyes locked on something we couldn't see. Jonesy knelt beside a deep rut in the ground. Looks like someone was dragging something. I followed the tracks with my eyes. They led straight to a sinkhole in the sand. Not natural erosion. This was dug, a grave. Carter gestured for us to fan out. I stepped forward, heart hammering, the scent of old earth, rusted metal, and something sour hanging in the air. Zolik prodded the dirt with his boot. Something white poked through. Bone. Then, a hand. A rotting, shriveled hand. Jonesy gagged. Jesus Christ! I crouched, brushing more dirt aside. The bones were tangled together, fused, multiple bodies. Some wore old Soviet uniforms, others, Taliban rags. But there was something wrong with them. Their skulls had been split open, not by bullets, not by blades, by something else. The dirt shifted. I stepped back, rifle raised. You guys saw that, right? The ground sank, collapsing slightly, as if something underneath had just moved. A cold breath of wind cut through the air. The radio on Carter's shoulder crackled, and then the whispering started. Not one voice, dozens, Russian, Pashto, English, all layered on top of each other. Jonesy was shaking. Tell me you guys hear that. I barely registered Carter's voice. Back to base, now. I moved to follow, and then I saw it, near the edge of the pit, a pair of eyes, watching from the darkness below. And then, they blinked. I staggered back, my blood running cold. By the time I looked again, they were gone. The sky had darkened, the last sliver of sun sinking behind the desert hills. The outpost was wrapped in unnatural silence. No wind, no distant howls of wild dogs. Just nothing. We were gathered in the main tent, our rifles within arm's reach. No one spoke about the eyes in the grave, but I knew they saw it too. Ugly Betty lay at my feet, ears twitching, muscles tense. Even she could feel it. Something was wrong. Then, the radio crackled. Shh, shh. Jonesy looked up. Did someone leave a comm open? Carter grabbed his radio. Base command, this is Outpost Echo 3. Come in. Static. Then, a voice. Don't dig. My skin went ice cold. It was garbled, as if dragged through sand. But it was a voice. Who is this? Carter demanded. No response. Then the watchtower alarm blared. Beep, beep, beep. We scrambled to our feet, rifles up, sprinting toward the tower. I saw Zolik already up there, scanning the desert with his scope. His hands were shaking. I climbed up. What is it? Zolik swallowed. Thought I saw someone standing by the graves. I grabbed my night vision goggles, peering through the green-tinted scope. At first, nothing but sand. Then, a shadow. Tall. Too tall. Standing at the edge of the burial site. Unmoving. Watching. Shit, I whispered. How long has it been standing there? Zolik didn't answer, because the figure was now closer, and we never saw it move. I yanked my goggles off, looked again with my bare eyes. Nothing. Zolik let out a choked breath. Tell me you still see it. I didn't answer, because I did. Through the night vision, it was still there, closer than before, and it was smiling. The outpost alarm cut off suddenly, leaving behind a heavy, suffocating silence. I was still staring through my night vision goggles, heart pounding. The figure in the distance, gone. But I knew better. It was still there. Somewhere. "Lima, talk to me." Carter's voice snapped me back. I tore off the goggles, my head spinning. There was something out there. Zolik looked pale, gripping his rifle so hard his knuckles were white. Then, a distant scream, a soldier's scream. It came from the barracks. We bolted down the watchtower, rifles raised, the sand kicking up behind us. I reached the door first, kicking it open. The lights inside flickered, casting long, warped shadows against the walls. Jonesy was gone. His gear, still there. His rifle, still slung over his cot. His boots, untouched. But he was nowhere to be found. A sharp chill swept through the air, sending a shudder down my spine. Then, the radio crackled. Jonesy's voice. "Guys? What the hell?" I froze. His voice sounded far away, like he was speaking through layers of static. Carter grabbed the radio. "Jonesy? Where are you?" Silence. Then, footsteps, software slow, coming from the barracks hallway. Carter raised his rifle. "Jonesy?" No answer. The door at the end of the barracks creaked open, and standing in the doorway was Jonesy, or something that looked like him. He was facing away from us, standing completely still. Zolik took a cautious step forward. "Jonesy?" No answer. Then, slowly, his head turned, but his body didn't move, just his head, turning, too far. His neck cracked, a deep, wet, sickening pop. I felt a wave of pure animal terror. Then, the lights went out, and the screaming started. Darkness swallowed the outpost. The power was out. The only light came from our flashlights, flickering as if struggling to stay on. I pressed my back against the barracks wall, gripping my rifle. Heavy breathing filled the space. Hours. No one spoke. No one dared move. Then, the radio crackled again. Jonesy's voice. "I'm underground." A cold wave crashed through me. Jonesy was right in front of us, or whatever was wearing his face. Carter, voice tight, whispered, "Jonesy, where are you?" Static. Then, clearer this time. "Buried." The sand outside shifted, a slow, sinking sound. Zolik's flashlight caught something outside the window. The ground was moving. Small indentations formed in the dirt, like footprints, but walking backward. Then, a hand broke through the sand. I nearly fired my rifle. Fingers, pale and skeletal, clawed upward from beneath the outpost. Then another, and another. The earth rippled, bodies trying to pull themselves free. But their faces were missing. Hollow, open-mouthed, like something had taken their identities, but left the shells behind. A chilling moan filled the air. Dozens of voices overlapping. "They buried us alive." Carter snapped to action. "Move, now!" We rushed out, nearly trampling over the shifting bodies in the sand. Ugly Betty was barking, snarling, at nothing. Or at everything. Then, in the distance, a single figure stood by the graves, watching. Jonesy, the real one. Or at least, what was left of him. His mouth opened, and in a voice that wasn't his own, he whispered, "You dug too deep." We barricaded the doors, but it didn't matter. The sound was everywhere. Scraping, from beneath the floor, behind the walls, outside in the sand. Something was digging. Carter's breathing was uneven. He was trying to keep it together, but I could see his fingers twitching around his rifle. "No one leaves alone," he muttered. "We stick together." Zolik's face was pale as death. "We already lost Jonesy, man. Who's next?" A sharp knock. All of us froze. The barracks door. 1, 2, 3 slow knocks. Carter moved first, weapon raised. He edged closer, motioning for me to cover him. I swallowed hard, steadying my rifle. The knocking came again, 3 times, rhythmic, intentional. Carter hesitated. Then, he yanked the door open. No one there. Just a trail of footprints, leading away from the outpost. I aimed my flashlight at them. The prints weren't fresh. They were already half buried, like they'd been there for hours. Zolik whispered, "Guys, look at the end of the trail." I followed his gaze, and my blood turned to ice. At the far end, where the footprints stopped, Jonesy's boots, standing upright. No body, just his boots, standing in the sand. And then, the radio crackled. Jonesy's voice. "Stop digging." I turned. "Carter, we need to..." But Carter wasn't looking at me anymore. His gaze was locked on the ground, his fingers twitching. And then, like he was in a trance, he picked up a shovel and started digging. Carter's shovel hit the dirt with dull, rhythmic thuds, over and over. He didn't blink, didn't hesitate, digging deeper. The rest of us stood frozen, watching him. Something about this felt wrong. "Carter." My voice came out dry. "Put the shovel down." He didn't stop, didn't even look at me. His breathing was shallow, lips moving as if he was muttering something. Zolik stepped closer, whispering, "What the hell is he saying?" I strained to listen. Carter was whispering names none of us recognized, names in languages we didn't speak. Then, his shovel hit something, a dull, hollow thud. He stopped. The outpost fell silent. Then, from the hole, a breath. Not wind, not movement. A breath. Deep, ragged, like something waking up. Then, the sand caved in. The hole collapsed beneath Carter's feet. He screamed, dropped the shovel, and something pulled him down. I lunged, grabbed his vest. His eyes were wild with terror. "Pull me up! Pull me up!" I yanked. Zolik grabbed him too. We could feel something pulling back, something beneath the dirt. The whispering started again. Only this time, it wasn't Carter. It was coming from the hole. Dozens of voices, layered, echoing. "You dug too deep." We pulled Carter free just as the sand sealed shut behind him, like nothing had ever been disturbed. He was shaking, eyes wide, mouth open, but no sound came out. Then, finally, he whispered, "I saw them." Carter hadn't spoken in minutes. He just sat there, staring at the sand, trembling. His hands were raw from gripping the shovel too tight. Zolik crouched beside him, shaking his shoulder. "Carter, what did you see?" Carter finally looked up. His eyes were wrong, bloodshot, unfocused, like he wasn't all the way here. Then, he whispered something, too quiet. I leaned closer. His lips barely moved. "They're waking up." The moment he said it, the radio shrieked with static. Not normal static. This was wrong. Distorted screams, broken voices overlapping, rising in pitch. Until it sounded like pure agony. We flinched back, covering our ears. Then, boom. The watchtower light exploded. I instinctively dropped to my knee, rifle up. The desert beyond the fence was pitch black. Then, footsteps, slow, dragging, crunching the sand. Zolik's voice was barely a whisper. "Guys." I followed his gaze, to the far end of the outpost. A figure stood there, tall, motionless, watching, its arms too long, its body too thin, its face a void. But it wasn't alone. More figures stepped from the shadows. First 2, then 5, then, too many to count, standing just beyond the fence, silent, unmoving, waiting. Then the radio crackled again. A voice, low, unnatural. "Time to join us." Then, The gate rattled, and the first figure stepped inside. The gate creaked open, not fast, slow, deliberate, like whoever, whatever, was coming in, wanted us to hear it. I gripped my rifle so hard my knuckles ached. Zolik whispered, "We need to move. Now." But Carter just stood there, breathing too slow, too deep. His face was blank, his eyes locked on the figures stepping into the outpost. I grabbed his vest. "Carter, snap out of it." No response. Then, he started walking, toward them. I yanked him back, but he fought me. His voice was wrong, flat, lifeless. "I have to go." I shoved him back. "The hell you do?" Zolik swung his rifle up. "Don't let them touch him." Then, the nearest figure stepped into the light, and I saw its face. Or rather, Jonesy's face. But it wasn't him. The features were stretched, wrong. The eyes were too black, too empty, and when it smiled, the lips peeled too far back, exposing teeth that weren't human. It raised one long bony finger and pointed at Carter. Then, it spoke, not in one voice, in many, layered, distorted, overlapping.
"He belongs to us now."
The moment it spoke, Carter screamed. His whole body convulsed. He collapsed to his knees, clawing at his head. "Get out of my head!" Zolik fired. The shot rang through the outpost. The bullet ripped through the thing's chest. But it didn't fall, didn't flinch, just smiled wider. Then it whispered,
"Your turn."
And the lights went out. Total darkness. I couldn't see my hands, couldn't see Zolik, just the black void swallowing the outpost. Then, a breath, right next to my ear, a low, ragged inhale. I spun, rifle up, finger squeezing the trigger. Nothing there, but I felt it. Something moved past me. Then, Carter started laughing. Not normal, not right, low, choked, like he was being strangled but still found it funny. I gritted my teeth. "Carter?" Zolik's flashlight flickered back on, and I saw him. Carter was standing, but he wasn't alone. Something tall and thin was behind him, too close. Its arms wrapped around his shoulders, its face pressed against his ear. Carter's eyes were rolled back, his lips moving, whispering words we couldn't hear. Then the thing turned its head, looked right at me, and in Carter's voice, it spoke.
"Why are you still fighting?"
I fired. Bang! The muzzle flash lit up the room, and in that split second, I saw them. Not just one. Hundreds, crawling on the ceiling, hunched in the corners, faces we knew, soldiers long gone, and they were all smiling. The power came back on. Carter was gone. The room was empty. Just me, Zolik, and the radio crackling. Echo 3, reinforcements inbound. A transmission. But it wasn't command. Because the voice speaking was Carter. The radio crackled with Carter's voice, but I knew it wasn't him. Not anymore. Zolik's eyes were wide, panic setting in. "We need to get out of here now." I nodded, adrenaline surging. "To the vehicles." We moved quickly, sticking to the shadows, avoiding the pools of light that felt more like traps than safety. The outpost was eerily silent, the usual hum of generators and distant chatter replaced by an oppressive quiet. As we neared the motor pool, I heard it. A faint whispering, like a chorus of voices just beyond comprehension. I glanced at Zolik. "Do you hear that?" He nodded, fear etched on his face. "Keep moving." We reached the Humvee, and I slid into the driver's seat, hands trembling as I fumbled with the keys. The engine roared to life, a sound that should have been comforting, but felt ominous in the stillness. Zolik climbed in beside me, weapon ready, eyes scanning the darkness. "Go, go." I slammed the accelerator, the Humvee lurching forward, tires kicking up sand as we sped toward the gate. But as we approached, my heart sank. The gate was closed, heavy chains wrapped around the bars, secured with a padlock that hadn't been there before. Zolik cursed. "We're trapped." I swerved, turning the vehicle toward the perimeter fence, desperation clouding my judgment. "Hold on," I shouted, aiming for a section of the fence that looked weaker, hoping we could break through. The Humvee crashed into the fence, metal screeching as it buckled but didn't give way. We were stuck, the vehicle entangled in the twisted metal. Zolik pounded the dashboard. Now what? Before I could answer, the whispering grew louder, surrounding us, seeping into the vehicle. I felt a cold chill crawl up my spine as I realized the voices were speaking our names. Zolik, Lima. We froze, fear paralyzing us. Then, from the rearview mirror, I saw them. Figures emerging from the shadows, their movements unnatural, eyes glowing faintly in the darkness. Zolik raised his rifle, but his hands were shaking. "There's too many." I gripped the steering wheel, knuckles white, mind racing for a plan. But deep down, I knew. There was no escape. The whispers turned into a low hum, vibrating through the air like a living thing. The figures surrounded us, shadows stretching in the moonlight. Zolik gripped his rifle. "We make a run for it?" I stared at the gate, the fence, the endless dark beyond. There was nowhere left to go. Then, Carter's voice crackled over the radio again. "You're almost home." A chill shot down my spine. I turned to Zolik, heart hammering. "We're already dead, aren't we?" Zolik's face fell. The thought hadn't hit him until now. Before he could answer, one of the figures stepped forward. Not fast, slow, unnatural. And when it came into the light, I saw my own face staring back at me. My breath hitched. My stomach turned to ice. It was me. But it wasn't. Its features stretched too thin. The skin was pale. The mouth curled just a little too wide. It raised its hand. A mirror of mine. "Join us." The moment it spoke, the air dropped to freezing. Zolik screamed. Not in pain. In horror. I turned just in time to see his body convulsing, his arms stretching, his face melting into something wrong. The Forsaken were taking him. I lunged, grabbing him by his vest, but when he turned to me, it wasn't him anymore. His eyes were gone. His mouth whispered my name. Then he let go and vanished. The radio buzzed again. Reinforcements inbound. My own voice. Then everything went black. Darkness, thick, suffocating, absolute. Then I wake up. The hum of a helicopter fills my ears. Wind whips against my face. My body jerks upright, lungs gasping for air as if I've been drowning. I blink rapidly. Sweat drips down my forehead. I'm in full gear. Helmet strapped, rifle slung. Carter is beside me. Zolik, too. Jonesy grins like nothing ever happened. Like he never disappeared. My mind is racing, images flashing too fast to grasp. The outpost, the graves, the Forsaken, Zolik screaming, Carter digging. But it's all slipping, fading, like a dream I was never supposed to remember. I swallow hard, trying to steady my breathing. The radio on my vest crackles. A voice, my own voice. Echo 3, reinforcements inbound. A chill runs down my spine. I grab Carter's arm, my grip tight. "Carter, how long have we been in the air?" He frowns. What kind of question is that? I turn to Zolik. "Do you remember getting on the chopper?" Zolik laughs uneasily. "What's with you, man? You good?" But something flickers in his expression. He's unsure, because he doesn't remember either. I grip the edge of my seat, forcing myself to focus. I look down at my mission briefing. My breath catches. It's the same paper as before, the same exact creases, the same faded print. Echo 3, proceed to investigate abandoned outpost. Possible enemy presence. My hands start shaking. I rip off my helmet, glancing at the open ramp of the chopper. The desert stretches below. The outpost comes into view, and then I see them, the Forsaken, hundreds, standing in the sand, motionless, watching. But something is wrong. They're wearing gear, our gear, and then I see myself, standing at the watchtower, watching, waiting. My head snaps back toward Carter. Carter, listen to me. We've done this before. We've already been down there. We have to. But my words die in my throat, because Carter isn't looking at me anymore. His head twitches. His mouth opens too wide, and in a voice that isn't his, he whispers, "It's your turn now." I shove back, heart slamming against my ribs. The lights inside the helicopter flicker. The crew chief, the one who's been flying us in, I look at him for the first time, and my stomach drops. He has no eyes, just hollow black pits. And when he speaks, his voice is layered. Not one voice, many. Echo 3, prepare to deploy. I whirl toward Zolik. Do not jump. Do not leave this chopper. But he's already standing, face blank, eyes distant, like he's being pulled. He steps forward, one step, then another. I grab him. Don't! But his head turns toward me, and I see his eyes. They aren't his anymore. He smiles. You don't have a choice. Then he jumps. I scream his name, lunging. The chopper tilts. Wind whips through the open ramp, yanking at me. Carter stands too. I grab at his vest. Carter, don't! But he only smiles, tilting his head. And in my voice, he whispers, "Reinforcements inbound." He jumps. I stagger back. They're all gone. It's just me, and the crew chief with the hollow eyes. The radio crackles again. A new voice, a broken whisper, distorted and fading. But I recognize it, because it's mine. Don't jump. The words hit me like a bullet. I know what's happening now. I know what I have to do. First turn. The desert stretches below. The outpost waits. I grip the edges of the ramp, heart hammering, knowing that no matter what, I will jump. Because I always have. Because I always will. Because I was never meant to leave.